wonderful insights. So let's just start off with some working definitions. So we're talking tonight about colorblind casting and color conscious casting. So who wants to jump in there and give us a definition of one of those two?
I looked it up because I like to be factual about these things. I don't want to just say what I think is the answer. So Wikipedia and the free encyclopedia on the internet are going to help me. So colorblind casting, also known as non-traditional casting, integrated casting, or blind casting, period, is the practice of casting without considering the actor's ethnicity, skin color, body shape, sex, and or gender. And then color conscious casting, Wikipedia does not understand what that is, just so that we know that the definition is still unqualified at the moment. But according to Harvard Business School, yes, color conscious casting is the ability to cast knowing the person's ethnicity, gender, and it's, yeah, the fact that Wikipedia doesn't know it is amazing, but Harvard Business does. So that's the...
And that the definition comes from Harvard Business School and not from, I don't know, Yale Drama School or any, theater communications group or, American Drama League or, anything that has to do with theater. We leave it to a business school to define what color conscious casting means. That in itself is ridiculous to me. But let's go back to this idea about colorblind casting. Like that needs to just be taken out of the vocabulary, right?
Totally.
I mean,
yeah, I want to say that the operative words in that definition are without consideration.
Yes.
Look at those two. I'm like, yep, you pretty much nailed it right there as far as the definition of colorblind casting. You're casting without consideration. Right there for anything.
Right.
Like, and I think I've said this before, but like, we all have eyes. Like, unless you're actually blind, we see color, we see shapes, we make a set of decisions, unfortunately, based on what we see. And so taking that into account, I think actually is really important. Like casting has to be color conscious. It can't be color blind. And then to say that a synonym for it would be non-traditional, that is saying that the traditional casting, the default is white.
Yeah.
So I think that in itself is problematic to think about colorblind casting as.
So we have tipped our hand early in this conversation about colorblind versus color conscious. We will come out and say that we have a little bit of an agenda tonight, which is to move this conversation to considering more color conscious casting than colorblind casting. So we'll just put that on the table at the beginning. What is it about? So this is also tonight is called colorblind versus color conscious casting in Shakespeare. Because for whatever reason, it seems like Shakespeare theaters end up with a little more freedom to do this kind of, whatever you want to call it, casting, than in kind of contemporary realistic drama. Does anyone talk about why that is that Shakespeare theater has a little bit more flexibility to be able to cast differently when you consider race, gender, all of it really, but tonight we're talking about race, so.
I don't mind jumping.
I know, I was gonna say, I've done too much talking, but somebody else.
I will check that in myself tonight also, of like, I want to answer everything first. Aside from the fact that a lot of contemporary plays, at least that I am experienced with, tend to already have the races of the people specific to the playwright in the time and the time period that they want to have the conversation or the play in. I feel like it becomes very specific for contemporary playwrights, and rightfully so in some cases. And then when it comes to Shakespeare, mostly because it's a 400+ year art. And if you really think about it, it was happening in England at a time where maybe majority of people were white, but that's not saying that the slave trade wasn't still happening, and excursions to the Far East were not happening. It's just that those particular actors at that time just happened to be white, but we no longer have that in our worlds anymore. So I feel like for Shakespeare, it becomes a more open arena for anyone and everyone to play, because who knows, it could be anybody, and the characters are usually universal as well. So I'm gonna leave that there because I could go on and on.
Yeah,
I
as
think
for
that's,
I mean, as for myself, I mean, this is the, I mean, Shakespeare was the reason, like, why. I mean, Shakespeare is the reason why I have a career now, because really I don't play very much outside of classical theater. I mean, really, like, the credo that I've always gone by since I was in high school is that when it comes to Shakespeare, everybody can play. Everybody can play in this playground here, you know. Um, and you look back at, you know, what it is that they, even what they were doing, of course, like, everyone was essentially British, but, you know, you see them doing a Greek play, they're, you know, they were British folk just putting togas on, you know, and essentially we're doing the same thing now with a whole sphere, you know, where everyone is just given that invitation, you know, with the exception of a few roles in the canon. I mean, anyone and everyone can do this. You know, I can be a king, Ty can be a king, Newton can be a king, B can be a king, anybody can be a king.
I think, you know, like, yeah, absolutely. I agree with you guys that there's a universality to the language and to just the stakes of the characters and the circumstances that everyone can embody, right? But there's also like, we've talked about this at All Shakes before, this imaginative distance that modern audiences have with Shakespeare. I think because the language is already poetic and because it was written so long ago, audiences today have no problem imagining like all 5 of us on screen, right? Being part of a family in Shakespeare. But then if you suddenly cast us in like, you know, a Tennessee Williams, I think suddenly some audiences would have a problem with that because they couldn't imagine themselves and their grandparents having this kind of familial relationship.
Mm.
And that actually speaks to, you know, certain layers of race and racism that has been built into the fabric of our society. Like, I think that the further away a piece gets from our current reality, the more people can imagine that people who look like us can be in it. And that's the sad part. That's actually what I think is also a part of it.
Yeah, there seems to be a particular kind of disconnection that happens where it's like that's so far away from me in such a foreign time anyway to what B is saying, what the language is so foreign and it's so disconnected that I can imagine almost anything happening there. I think there's that. I also think because it's public domain that a lot of, in the kind of zeitgeist of Shakespeare, there is already a lot of adaptations of it and reimaginings and those kinds of things. And I think that pressed upon the perspective of the general public, when you look at Shakespeare, it's like one of these things that can be very malleable and susceptible to the artistic direction of someone or a group of people.
So as I said, we tipped our hand a little bit earlier where we're in favor of considering color conscious casting versus color blind casting. So let's just get into why color blind casting can be problematic. So does anyone want to give an example of a time where you saw color blind casting that did not consider the story that was told by the skin of the actor, color of the skin of the actor, went wrong in a Shakespeare production, either that you've been in or that you've seen?
Where it went wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. I mean, we can. I mean, of course I can point out so many microaggressions with, you know, whatever, especially when it comes to comedy. You know, like for instance, you know, like
Oh,
I can look at something like, we'll say Love's Labor's Lost, you know, and we'll look at somebody like, you know, we'll look at somebody like Moth, and we'll look at somebody like Don Armato, you know, to where it's like we are talking about that fantastical Spaniard. And of course, we are looking at that other, you know, that's up there, because really, when it comes down to it, whenever he's not on stage, they are making a joke of this particular character. So of course, you know, that's number one with me right now. So in any way, shape, or form, you know, that you do see, you know, a particular production, say with Don Armato, because this is something, you know, that I have firsthand knowledge of, is, you know, they are always going to make a boob out of the guy. But then at the same time, you also have a servant that's following him around. So, you know, there have been times to where, like, I will see Don Armato being played by a white man, and I will see a minority playing his servant right there. So it just takes me to a place to where it's like, you know, I don't know what to be pissed off more at right now when it comes to colorblind casting, because of course we can talk about, you know, it's like, oh, we're opening up the playing field to everyone. Yes, but how? How are you opening up the playing field to everyone right now?
Yeah.
You know, and really, it's like that's just like, that's one of the like, that's just coming to my mind right now. Yeah.
well, I think that's like a really important point that Jay is making, which is often throughout the years, what I've seen is similar, where there's a token person of color in a role that is clownish or somehow a monster in Shakespeare, and then everyone else on stage is white or white appearing, right? And so what does that say to an audience, just on a subconscious level, when all you see on stage is like an all-white cast, and then the one BIPOC person is already othered in their character? Or the flip happens where, you know, years ago, there was this misconceived production of a very political play, Julius Caesar, that where everything was set in an imagined pan-Asian realm, from costumes to weapons to set. I mean, it was just a hodgepodge of different Asian fetishized, beautiful things. And the entire cast was white. And then Julius Caesar was played by a black actor, a phenomenal black actor. I mean, top of the top Shakespearean actor. But you know, how horrible was it when I was sitting in the audience seeing all of this? Of course, there's bowing, there's kowtowing, there's all these like Asian mannerisms taken on by these actors. So I'm already like feeling like really uncomfortable. But then we get to the part where Julius Caesar stabbed, and this cast of white people are stabbing the only black man on stage. And this was a matinee where most of the students in the audience were from Philadelphia public schools. So they're predominantly black and brown students and Asian, you know, and it was a horrifying experience. It was one of those moments where I felt I had to do something from then on, you know, like as more than just an actor, as someone who speaks to people and tries to affect change, because it was so terrible. And I knew at that moment, no one on the team took the care to think about who was going to be seeing this happen on stage, because protecting that black actor in rehearsals from having that moment rehearsed over and over. So there were a number of things that went wrong there, but ultimately I was like, casting has to be so conscious. You have to be conscious of the bodies that you're putting together and what story those actors have to recreate in rehearsal. And then what story are you projecting to an audience, especially if most of your audience is going to identify with the one person of color on stage, you know? So that's an example that I think was just horrific and has stayed with me. And yeah.
Yeah, I think you're getting at something that would be about, you know, the audience comes in and brings in their own experiences with them as well. So they come and sit down and they look on the stage, and the invisible story or subconscious story of the bodies that are there and what their role is in the story that's being told is picked up by these people, by the different experiences that they have as well. And you brought up a really interesting thing too about the actor who's going through these machinations on the stage, whether it's in the story or it's as a result of colorblind casting, that they're now in this place where they have to justify their existence because they also know that the audience is bringing things in, and they're like, well, I need to make sure that my part of the story I have a grasp on. And as they do that, there's I think a chance for hurt and harm to be done. So true.
Yeah, I feel like I can speak to an experience of like where I think I was cast in a colorblind situation and then made it a color conscious situation. In even with Del Shakes, because David has given me the permission to talk about this. But I worked on Merchant of Venice, and I played the part of Nerissa. And Nerissa is usually known as the servant to Portia in the land of the play. And given that the woman playing Portia, Liz Felios, was a white woman, I felt I was in my feelings about being her servant, and feeling like as a Black woman, what that meant for people to see me serving her story and making sure that in the midst of this power dynamic, there was still a significant amount of respect. And I communicated that with my director and producer and with the actress playing Portia. And we found this happy medium of making it both important to the work that we were doing in the room as just equals, and also as actors playing the parts. So I feel like there comes a time where I know, for me, I'm a funny person and I'm probably gonna play more funny parts. Yes, I am funny, you can laugh. Newton. But also specifically speaking, that those parts tend, for me, to mean that I have to have that conversation and making sure that people understand that when they cast me, if it is a servant situation, that they know what they're doing when they do that, because that is saying something. And if I'm cast with another Black woman or an Asian woman, that dynamic changes. If that person, it will constantly change based on the bodies that are in front of you, making it a conscious decision to do so, instead of just being like, wow, this person's amazing and funny, that person's amazing and funny and Black. Like, throw all that in there.
Yeah, it's all about really just like just if being put in that situation, taking ownership of it and making it your own. I mean, this is something that I went through in playing Caliban, which is a role that I had been adverse to playing for a very long time. Of course, because of my own insecurities and my own fears, of being a brown man in this country.
I'll say, if anybody doesn't know, Caliban is the character in The Tempest that is kind of the monster on the island that Prospero, the magician who's taking control of this island, has enslaved, and have him serving him for however long he wants.
Yeah, and I, coming up, as far as just like when it came from season to season, auditioning and whatnot, and having directors saying, you would make a wonderful Caliban. Well, why would I make a wonderful Caliban? Because I'm a monster? Is that it? It's like, I can't play Ferdinand. It's like, you immediately see me as this. So, there was a time to where I patently refused to play this role. I mean, of course, until about 4 years ago. And I said, you know what? I think now is probably the time to do this, to where I can take some type of ownership back. And really what that meant was, of course, taking ownership of this and going back to the text and saying, all right, where is it that we're going wrong here? And taking out lines that I just didn't want, that I refused to say, which was, number one, for me, calling Prospero master. When's the last time that I've worked for you? I'm not calling you master on this stage. Because if anything, I'm in opposition with you this entire time. I'm not calling you master. So that was number one, just to go. The other thing that was on my agenda is, look, we are dealing with a comedy here. I do understand that Caliban is funny, but I refuse to make him a joke. And that was really just my through line for the entire thing, is that we are not going to make this character a joke. This person has dignity, you know, along with everybody else on this stage right now, because it is easy. And of course, it always is easy in Shakespeare. Like, as the same thing that I said with Don Armado, is to always poke fun and to make a joke of the other that's on stage, on a classical stage, you know, because it is pointed out, and it is just made that plain even more, because everyone is that much, for lack of a better word, normal when you compare them to it. So yeah, that was really just something that I had a problem with. And of course, you know, getting to what it is that B was saying as well, it's like more often than not, it's like you will see, you know, that you put, you know, these minorities in these quote unquote magical roles, you know, or just these other types of roles. So yeah, of course, it's like that is the time to when, yeah, the colorblind casting in Shakespeare classical theater can, in essence, go wrong if it's not done correctly, and if you're not giving it to an actor who can take responsibility for it and who can own the discourse before, during, and after.
Great. So I want to take us, so Ty took us to the world of considering some Del Shakes casting practices. And I want to look at two recent productions, our last two full summer festival productions, which both had very diverse casts, but kind of went at getting to those casting situations in different ways. And it gets at some of that color conscious casting is multi-layered, how you consider color consciousness. So just want to talk, our last two summer festival productions were Much Ado About Nothing, which B directed, and then The Merry Wives of Windsor, which Krista Apple directed for us. And B, I don't know if I'll just kind of give it to you and let you talk about how, because you weren't, well, first I want to say that sometimes colorblind casting can just be interpreted as meaning like not biologically accurate casting. Like King Lear is we have a Black King Lear, and then an Asian daughter and a white daughter and a Latinx daughter. And that is certainly one way of looking at colorblind casting, but color conscious casting can be both that, non-biologically accurate, but it can also be taking a family and making them a Black family or a Latinx family or something like that.
Totally.
So how were you thinking when you started putting the ensemble together of Much Ado About Nothing? What was in your mind, and how did you start thinking about it from a color conscious perspective?
Well, for me, I wanted to fill the world with a multiracial cast. That was more multiracial than we've seen at Del Shakes, I think. And also everyone had to be solid as an actor, as a person. And in some ways, someone could look at the production and say that's colorblind because no one was, traditionally biologically related, right? But for me, there's always intention. Because I'm an Asian-bodied person who's always thinking about how different cultural experiences intersect, that I'm like, there's always intention in the casting of someone, in putting bodies together. Like Clarice being an Asian-bodied, female-presenting person tells a specific story when her aunt is a Black lady and her dad's a white man and her lover's a Latinx male-presenting guy. We don't get to see that often on stage, period. Like sometimes I feel like a prince or princess might be a token ethnicity, and then that's the one person on stage you'll see in that dynamic, and then you'll see maybe another person of color pop up in the ensemble. But here I was just like, okay, A, everyone we called in was actually really excellent, and I was like crying over it. But B, it was so, like when we came up with the ultimate cast, I was like, this is so exciting because there was actually multiple Latinx identifying actors, which also is rare because we don't get to see a lot of shows where 3 to 4 Latinx actors get to be on stage in principal roles. And here we had Jay, and we had Joe Vito Ramirez, and we had Crystal Rosa, is that her last name? And then the young apprentice who ended up being a Temple,
Robert Mora.
Robert Mora, you know, and then we had just like incredible representation on, and I thought off stage as well. And that was intentional. Like as a director, I was like, on stage, I needed to reflect the people I hang out with, the people in my world, which is incredibly diverse and multiracial. But also behind the scenes, I had a Chinese American choreographer and a mixed Asian, you know, designer. Just for me, that was intentional, you know? And so it wasn't about making sure that an entire family was Asian, or that all of the prince's party was Black, or that, but you know, for me, it was just, let's just make sure that not only excellent actors get work, but excellent actors we never get to see on stage all get up on stage together, and that it's not just a token person and then majority white, or that diversity doesn't mean just Black and white, which often happens too. With a lot of theater companies, we'll see that diversity just means, okay, we put a lot of white people on stage and 3 Black people, and then you'll see like no Asian people, no Latinx people, no Indigenous people, and there are Indigenous theater people, we know, right? And so for me, it's really important when we start thinking about color conscious casting, that it's also who do we want to bring on stage to fill out the narrative, to normalize diversity for our audiences, to say this is normal. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna be quiet now.
Just to add to that, B, and this is something very short. I had to take a picture one day of just all of us, of Robert, of Crystal, of Joe. I said, come here, we need to take a picture. And they're like, why? Because this hasn't happened to me in a dozen years. Like, I haven't been on stage with like this many Latinx performers in so long. So I don't know when this is gonna happen again. So let's take a picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Jay, you answered the first question I was going to ask you, which was that, you know, what did it mean to you to have, you know, Latinx ensemble members? But I also know that just even before you knew who the rest of the cast was, just getting offered the role of Benedict was a kind of emotional experience for you. And I just wonder if you could talk about what it meant to be cast in that particular role and why.
You better not make me cry again, David. No, really. I mean, look, I had just gotten off of a season, like a couple of seasons of playing just like back-to-back monsters and servants. You know, like we're talking about Caliban, we're talking about Dracula, you know, we're talking about Lucky in Waiting for Godot. You know, I had been spit on for 2 years, like just back to back to back. You know, Touchstone is in there as well. You know, to where like I don't play romantic leads, you know, like when it comes to my type in Shakespeare, you know, it kind of just has like a little, I have a niche, you know, and my niche is not romantic lead. So of course, when I found out that I had gotten this, I was just so incredibly taken aback, because I don't play roles like this. You know, I just don't play roles like this. And, you know, ever since, you know, I had been doing Shakespeare, ever since I've been in theater, aside from when I was in high school and everybody looked like me, I never played a romantic lead at all. Because of course, like, you know, and I tell this story all the time, is that, you know, whenever I used to go out of where I live, the border of Mexico, where I went to high school, I didn't see anybody who looked like me on stage at all. You know, so this is something that I have carried around with me, you know, ever since I was a teenager. So of course, you know, there is a lot of feelings behind that when, you know, somebody does, you know, see that type of worth in me, that I'm not ugly, you know, that I do, you know, have these traits of, you know, being someone who is worthy of being loved on stage. If that makes any sense.
So then the very next summer, we did The Merry Wives of Windsor. And that was one where, so Krista Apple, when she directed that, started off specific. So that's a very domestic play. It's about, you know, a specific community, you know, a neighborhood. And the family of the Pages is kind of the family that everyone wants to be in that world. And Krista went into that casting process knowing that she wanted that family to be a Black, nuclear, realistic family. There were other roles that she went about casting the same way that B did, just wanting to kind of fill the world with the diversity of individuals, but she knew that family wanted to be a Black family. And Newton ended up playing Mr. Page in that production. So Newton, I just wondered if you could talk about what that choice meant to you and the kind of the thinking behind it and what that was like in the casting process.
Yeah, so one of the things that struck me, I mean, also the casting process for that show for me might have been a little different than for initially. I was coming into audition for another role, and there was conversation with Krista, myself, and David about castings a Black actor in this role where they may not come out in the best light, and how I felt about that. So we had these, it was really nice to first of all, to have that, know that that's part of how this is being put together. And then to finally kind of end up in the Page family, and all of the actors who played the other two actors, was myself, Mistress Page, and our daughter, and we all were Black actors, and we all wore glasses too. So it really felt like we were a family unit. And I don't remember, and it wasn't kind of like this, it wasn't tokenized, right? It wasn't like, we're going to make them all Black because they do this thing that happens that's written into the story, and we want to kind of make them other, as we were talking about before. It was like, this family that everyone wants to be like and is relatively joyous is Black, and that's just what it is. And it felt really great. It felt like we could just live in those characters and not have to worry about these other things that were going on. We could really play to the truths of what was happening in the story. And I actually don't remember the last time that actually has happened for me. And it wasn't like me playing Bob Cratchit, who's a poor man that can't buy chicken for his family. This felt more like, these are the people in the house that everyone would go over to have a party, and they're very respectable and respected, and there's respect between the three of them, and they're Black. It's very rare to get that experience for sure.
Great. So then one more kind of specific Del Shakes sort of casting process that I want to talk about, because all of these individuals with us today have been in our community tours. And that the community tours kind of start from a color conscious perspective, but from I think another reason. And that's, from the very beginning of doing our community tours, they always happen about 8 or 9 actors. And it was always I don't want to say informal, it was pretty formal that when we went into the casting process, we knew that we wanted at least 4 of those actors to be BIPOC actors, because the audiences we perform for on the community tour are wildly diverse, much more diverse. Our summer festival audience is a pretty, traditional, quote unquote, theater audience. It's pretty white, it's pretty upper middle class. But our community tour audience is wildly diverse, lots of different income levels, lots of different education levels. And we want to make sure that when you come and see those productions, that you're able to see and connect to someone that looks like you when you see that. But it becomes tricky sometimes because there are 8 actors. The first show we did was Pericles, which had, 50 characters in it. So at a certain point, you're trying to be color conscious. You're trying to be like, okay, what am I saying if somebody in this race is in this role? But then at a certain level, the brain just starts to melt because you're putting actors in so many different roles in those community tour productions. So I guess I'll first just start off with Pericles, because both B and Jay were in that. If you want to talk about the kind of casting situation with Pericles, and then we'll get into Merchant of Venice and Romeo and Juliet, which we were thinking about much more in a specific manner. And again, I know Ty has some questions about Romeo and Juliet as well.
Do you want me to talk first?
Yeah.
Oh. I loved Pericles. I loved the audition process. I loved the cast. I loved that kickoff community tour. That just meant so much for me. It meant so much for me to be auditioned as a princess / queen, and then know that I was going to play a bunch of dynamic parts, and that Kirk Wendell Brown was going to be my dad, and that Jamal Douglas was going to be my king.
So Kirk and Jamal were both Black men.
Both Black. And, often throughout my resume, my career, I should say, when I've been cast opposite a romantic interest, the person has been white. It hasn't been another Asian, not until recent years, because contemporary playwrights, more theaters have been producing contemporary playwrights of color who have written roles for me and other principal parts that are of color. So it was so exciting to be cast with another BIPOC artist as a lead and as a significant other. There's so many layers to that too. There's so many layers to that, but it was just refreshing to be an Asian woman who was allowed to be seen with a Black man on stage, and we were a king and a queen, and to have a cast that was really truly diverse, that there were a lot of equity contracts. And this is something that we've talked about before, but I'll bring it up here, that I think a lot of community tour works or educational outreach tours at different companies will employ emerging talented actors of color, but not necessarily professional actors of color who are at the equity level, which says something, right? Like, you look at a lot of these tours around the country and they're filled with non-professional BIPOC actors, which says you're not valuing the audience as much as you would your regular audience. Like, so main stage shows at a lot of theaters will offer up the big equity contracts. What I loved about this community tour experience, what I still love about it, is that Del Shakes has a higher number of equity contracts to employ professional BIPOC artists for these community tours to guarantee that like all of us have done a lot of Shakespeare. All of us put in like a lot of research, and that we honor the work so that the community tour audiences get high caliber performances from high caliber equity level artists. I think that's really important. So I'm going to stop there, Jay.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to what B is saying, because it was David who brought me on when he found out that I did have touring experience for Pericles, and pretty much B, what you just said was my that was my career before I came to Philadelphia. I was a non-union actor, and I was doing tours. I was doing Shakespeare tours up and down the South, and that's what I was doing. And of course, it was filled with BIPOC actors. That's exactly what it was. We were making $150 a week, and and we would we would take as much as we could from complimentary breakfast every morning. But yeah, getting away from that. Yeah, the way that David had gone about casting Pericles, like this for the initial tour, it was amazing. Just like coming in, and of course seeing Kirk and seeing you and seeing Jamal, I was like, wow, man, like this is great. And then just seeing just the way, that we all intertwine with each other, because we played so many different roles. I mean, like, I can just think of the ones that I played as far as, of being, Cleon, but then playing the Bawd at the same time. I mean, there's just little tidbits for everyone, for us to just flex our performing muscles, and all, you know, and all for the sake of telling just a beautiful story. Yeah.
So in some of our more recent community tours, we have looked at color consciousness in different ways. With The Merchant of Venice, when we were trying to tell a story about looking at how anybody who is defined as other gets treated by their community, we were trying to expand that story. So we cast Kirk Wendell Brown, a wonderful Black actor, as Shylock, as the lead Jewish character in that. But it was also interesting because that we also cast Newton as the love interest, and that really wasn't from a storytelling perspective. It wasn't trying to say anything about that world we were creating. It was just from that world of, we want to fill this cast with a lot of diverse actors. And then Romeo and Juliet, I know Ty was cast as the nurse for the 5th time in your in your career.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk, because I know you had to decide whether you wanted to do that role again.
Yeah, I had a very interesting conversation with Lindsay Smiling.
And we'll clarify that Lindsay Smiling, a wonderful director, actor, but a Black man.
Yes, and even talking with him, because I feel like the levels of color conscious casting has to be pervaded throughout the entirety of our world, because it seeps even into us. I will even say, as a producer and as a director, like B and like us all, like, you're trying to figure out this world, and you're trying to say who's best for the part, and you're like, that's really great. And then a part of you has to remember, oh, that's a Black actress playing a nurse part, which runs into the mammy thought process for me. And as a person who's played the part 5 times to various Juliets, Asian, white, Black, another Asian, and now a Hispanic woman played by Soul in this production, and feeling like, what does that mean to keep having this stereotype be put upon me, not because I don't necessarily like the character, and again, I know I'm funny, but there are other parts in this play that I did audition for. Am I just not right for that part? And why am I right for this part? And I think that that's a constant question that you have to keep asking yourself as both actor, director, producer, in casting someone who is of a specific race, and there are stereotypes that go along with that. What are you trying to say? And are you ready to have that conversation over and over and over and over again, as you navigate it? Because there are lines that the nurse says that are kind of ditzy and silly, which can make one believe that they're a joke, to go back to like what Jay said. And I was just like, I won't do that. Like, I learned that the first time I did it. I just won't be the joke. Like, I'll tell the joke, but I won't be the joke. So it's about figuring out that with your director, and Lindsay was ready to have that conversation. So like, I felt comfortable enough to do it again. Will I ever do it again? I never want to see Romeo and Juliet ever again. Ever again. Don't call me in.
Great. Newton, anything you want to throw in about the casting world with the community tours?
Yeah, I always feel like there is quite a bit of effort in creating what I'm picking up as we're talking, almost a third kind of casting, colorful casting. You know, it just kind of as a way of recognizing all that we want to pack this with as many folks and experiences as possible. With the community tours, I've done 2 of them, and I feel that there is some effort in trying to make to do colorful casting, and where there is kind of specificity in that, there is intention of not only in the casting process, but also in the rehearsal process. There's intention of, of a collective question of what is the story we are trying to tell with the bodies that are here right now, and really trying to get at that and gnaw at that to make sure that we are doing it, that we are good stewards of that process.
So I want to shift us now to one question that considers kind of just a personnel question in the casting process, and then we'll shift more to kind of talking about how each individuals kind of navigate making decisions about what roles you take. So we've talked that a couple of, like, B was a BIPOC director, Lindsay was a BIPOC director, but Krista was not. When I direct for Delver Shakespeare, I am not. And this question of why is it important to have a BIPOC person involved in the casting process? Yeah, I'll just leave it. I know that's something that the group wanted to talk about a little, so I'll just kind of put that out there and say, if it's not the director and if it's not the casting director, what are ways that a BIPOC person can be involved in the casting process?
I think there's a degree of representation in the producing side of the production, that if there's someone who is BIPOC involved, they're also kind of taking a temperature of what's happening in the space and with the process, and hopefully would be able to discuss things with the non-BIPOC individuals in the production that they may not pick up on. The simple thing of correcting, in classical text, it's, there are words you have to say right. You have to say them correctly, right? And so there's a little bit, I believe, in a director maybe giving a note to an actor, BIPOC actor, about the way that they're saying a word can land on that actor in a way that causes harm, and the director just feels that they're just giving a note. And if there is someone who is in the process, who's involved, who's around, might be able to witness that, then there's education that can happen. Then there's a person where that actor, if they're feeling harmed or if they have experienced some type of aggression, micro or macro, can kind of go to and speak to, say, did you see that thing? Was that what I thought it was? Also, and not speak from just getting notes in general. I think as a BIPOC, as a Black actor, I'll speak for myself. I when I get a note, depending on what it is, especially if it's something about diction and pronunciation, I might say, in back of my head, I'm done a lot of Shakespeare. Back of my head, I'm still, is that something about because I'm brown? Or what is that? Or is it because I'm actually not saying that thing correctly? And now I'm second guessing myself and I'm running through. And the person who might have given me the note, or the director or whatever, doesn't know this is happening, has no clue, moves on. And I think that could be troublesome and hard to mitigate for. But having another BIPOC body present is, I think, one way or a piece of how to maybe get at that.
Yeah, I mean, from inception of a project forward, I think representation matters, right? In season selection, in every ounce of programming, I feel like there needs to be a BIPOC presence in the room, in the decision making. And even if they're not the casting director or the director, to have them present in the room during casting to even protect the process of auditioning, to make sure that the BIPOC actors are taken care of in terms of whatever adjustments they might be thrown, but also to, like, lend a thought here and there about, like, hey, you saw this pattern of people for this role. And then you saw this pattern of people. I'm noticing that clearly this is white and clearly this is black. Or, you know, like just to have that lens that I think isn't normalized by predominantly white institutions yet.
Yeah, I want to throw out there that it's a matter of safety. Like that's a loaded word. But I feel like it's about who is a safe space in this room. If it's not the director, if it's not the dramaturg, if it's not the text coach, if it's not the producer, who is it? And if it's my fellow actors, at least for me, I clock that. And it's about saying once you're in the process, but auditioning is a totally different thing. And I feel like it's about making sure that those spaces are safe for all ideas to be brought forward and all points of view to be considered. Because most of the time, at least in my career, it is a mostly white room. It is usually a mostly white production team. It's mostly a white board. It's like when you start looking at how far back it goes, you go, well, I'm so small. How can I feel safe? And if there's not one other person in the midst of that, that's where my brain starts looking elsewhere and or finding safety within self, which is also a thing. And I put it out there that to find another person in that space that offers it would be awesome.
Ty and I are always really excited when we're on the same production. There's a party that happens. It's like getting to work and you're like your best friend's working your shift. It's like, but there's like, it's not even just because Ty and I like each other that we're good friends. It's like, okay, someone who's going to look at what's happening through a similar lens that I have. And then there's like this comfort of like, I won't be the only one, or I know that I can check to be like, am I crazy? No, I'm not. Okay, cool. You know, and that's exactly like you're saying, Ty, that safety, that comfort is really important.
And I'd say even throwing in Jay too, like with the last one with Romeo and Juliet, it's like, what's like, do you all see what I'm seeing? Like, we're all a part of this. And it's just a checking in. It's just a checking in.
Yeah.
But yeah, like any organization, I mean, oversight is incredibly important. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and I'll just share, you know, that from someone who's been trying to become more and more color conscious with casting, that I've also found there's times where I have ended up like talking myself out of casting a BIPOC actor in a role because worried about what that story would tell. And I was casting a production of Christmas Carol, and we saw a really wonderful Black actor for who was going to be considered partially for Marley. And it was a white director, a white producer, and me in the room. And as we were talking about casting decisions, people were getting really excited about this actor as Marley. And I just said, I was like, is there any problem with maybe the only Black man in this show, the first time we see him, being, you know, covered in chains? And we ended up not casting that actor in that role. And Newton has mentioned part of it. In Othello Shakes, we've started just having those asking those questions to the actors in the room. And even in that, I was the casting director. I wasn't the producer. I wasn't the director. So I didn't feel like I could be the person that room to be like, hey, before you leave the room, can I ask you a question about how you feel about this role and, you know, being a Black man who would appear in chains in this. So I think that's another reason why it's important to have a BIPOC member as part of that casting conversation, so you can have a free, open conversation about those sort of things. Because maybe a BIPOC actor would have been like, well, if you cast at least a couple other people, if the actor's not the only actor of color in the show, then it's okay. But if he's the only actor of color in the show, then, ooh, that is sending a message.
Or could they have rethought chains? Like, you know what I mean? Like Marley being weighed down by a burden or held captive by something doesn't necessarily have to always be chains. Like, why do we have to like keep holding on to like what the original model of Christmas Carol was with like the props, or you know what I mean? Like it could, I don't know. I mean,
but yeah, you're right, being that, but that, I think that speaks to some of the, like a little bit connected to what Ty was saying. How far back is this going when you look at it? Are there people in the room who are from conception, right, that are maybe looking at it in this different way, different lens, and trying to think about it differently? Or another option, right, is that it is a very artistic choice to do it very traditionally. That's a whole nother thing that happens too. And even in those instances, a Black actor may walk in and they go, something else fits in the director or the producer's brain about like, this person fits here for Marley, but not thinking about the chains at that point either, you know, because they're making this very conscious choice. And I don't know, I think it becomes, I just want to say also, David, you're like Keanu Reeves, you dodged that bullet for really, really, really did a good job there. But to your point of talking yourself out of it, it's very complex, very layered. I mean, we want it to be very kind of this or that, and it's very easy. But that's not how people are. That's not how people's experiences are. That's not where people come from. And it does take a little extra work to really like, you know, to not even just in the beginning, but through the entire process, a little extra brain juice to be conscious of these things.
Great. So I want to shift now and consider, as you are actors and are offered roles, your process for considering whether you take them, because we've had some questions come into the chat that kind of relate to that. And this kind of relates to Jay talking about his journey deciding whether he wanted to take Caliban or not. Ty talking about, well, I've done the nurse 5 times, never again. So kind of a two-part question was, one is how do you go about as actors, because casting's a two-way street, right? Ultimately, the director and the producing company make their decisions and put the offer out there, but then ultimately it's the actors that decide whether or not they're gonna take that or not. So what is the line that you each draw about whether to accept a role that may perpetuate stereotypes? And then on the flip side of that, this was a question that came into the chat. If you are in an audience and see, an actor a BIPOC actor who has decided to take on a role of a maid or whatnot, do you get offended by that?
So I want to answer your last question. No, I don't get offended, because you need that job. You need that job. And if I didn't get that job, I'm glad you got that job. Happy you got that job. Do I understand all the things that like led you up to that decision? Yes. So like whatever that is, like that's on you to take that in your backpack of stuff and figure it out for yourself as an actor. But also, I just feel like someone had to have taken those steps. Like someone had to play Mammy in Gone with the Wind, win an Oscar, but somebody had to do that in order for me to be where I am now, to have this conversation with you. And I take that very, I take that with huge consideration. And so representation, like we said, matters. So every time every single BIPOC person takes a part, I'm super happy they did it. I just want to know that the process was safe for them. I want to understand that everyone took that kind of consideration in the midst of that process to get there. And for me, now I'm going to lead back to your first question of like why I picked the part, is truly sometimes, am I going to have fun? Because again, I'm funny, and Del Shakes is hopefully going to do 12th Night the Musical. As a plug for the next year, let's pray to all the gods and whisper all the things to the crystals and the sun. But I would have been playing another servant character in the part, but I knew it was going to be fun. Why did I know it was going to be fun? Newton was going to be in it. A whole bunch of my friends were going to be in it, and Liz Felios and Robbie Hager and Tana Marquez. They were like, the whole team was just so strong that I was like, I will have fun. I know this is great. Servant part be damned. And that's why I choose my parts of like, what am I risking? What parts of my heart are going to break in the midst of this process? And if I deem the proportions livable, that's how I take it. Would I love to play lover parts? I'd love it. Jay, if I ever get to play Juliet in the midst of my lifetime in a play that I will not ever do again, I would only do it with you as Romeo, my friend, because that is how I feel like we have to start expressing like other wants and needs also, of like, you should see me as somebody who can play those parts too. But that's a whole other conversation about gender casting as well.
But as far as getting offended, like for me, like just to add on to what Ty was saying here, as far as getting offended from seeing everyone, it's like, no, everyone got to eat. Everybody got to eat. If anything, if I see somebody up there playing, like, see, like in, you know, I'll use my culture as, you know, as a substitution here. If I see someone, because I've done it, play a line cook on stage, what I want to do, I'm not going to be offended. If anything, I want to go have tea with that person. Say, all right, how'd that go? How was that for you? That's it. Let me learn from you right now. Yeah.
You know, earlier today I was watching an interview between David Letterman and Dave Chappelle. And there was a great moment where Dave Chappelle talks about why he left his TV show. And he said he was doing an episode and his jokes were really like edgy, right? And he was talking about like structural and systemic racism in his jokes and in his sketches. And he talked about how he did a sketch and he got the wrong kind of laugh. And that was the moment he was like, I'm not doing this anymore. And I felt that so hard, because it's like, you know, I'll play Asian characters that talk like me, or sometimes they come from somewhere and I have to study an accent and do it. If that character has agency and a great story and it teaches me something, it teaches the audience something, awesome, I'll do it. But if it's a character that is intended to get the wrong kind of laugh from white people laughing at Asians, or from other people laughing at Asians, I will refuse it. If it's a role that it fulfills a stereotype and there's no arc for that character, then I'll refuse to play it. It's never happened with Shakespeare, thank God. But most recently, I got emailed an offer to play a call girl. And in the script, it was the character was like a stereotypical name, like Kim Lee. And the scene was trying to pick up a client. And it was offensive that I was even sent the script. It was offensive to me that like this was still a stereotype that was perpetuated for someone who looked like me. And, you know, I kind of told this person off in an email, like, I was like, how dare you even send this to me? So those are the type of roles where I'm like, if it just perpetuates a bad stereotype, I refuse. And then if I see a friend of mine play it, to be honest, you guys, I am really disappointed in that person. I am. Because I'm like, that allows people to keep writing those scripts. So I get really angry. I'm not as generous as you guys. I'm like, I know we all got to eat, but at some point I'd rather wait tables. Like if my whole career people just offered me terrible roles that make me feel bad about playing them, then I'd rather just go back to my restaurant gigs, you know, but that's where I am. It's, yeah, to each their own.
Yeah, I think also when I think about whether I take a role or not, a lot of times it's about what happens in that first rehearsal. I mean, first audition. When I go into the first audition, even if it's something where I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this part, but I'll go in for the audition to see what they're thinking about, to see what the lens is that they're using to view this character and this story. And that's where I maybe push and pull and see where the edges of their sandbox are for this. And that informs me of like, oh, okay, I can tell the way the leaves are falling on this path. I don't think I want to go, you know, and that's when I would make a decision or not of taking a role or not. And I also would like to say, as you can see, no actor is a monolith. And I think that there is a very personal choice of taking a role. One of, I don't want to perpetuate those stereotypes. And also one of like, I don't have a choice because I do need to do this so that I can pay rent or whatever it may be. And I think that all of that lives in the potentiality of that lives in every actor who walks through the audition room door. And if there isn't, going back to that sense of safety, if there isn't that sense of safety in the process, then it can be, auditioning is already a vulnerable process and thing for an actor to do, that it's extra vulnerable. I feel when you're BIPOC artist. And as for yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. I covered both my points. I was like, did I cover all of them? I think I did.
I'm sorry, if I can just like add like one more thing. I'm doing the math in my head like right now because I didn't answer that first question, and it's like there's just sometimes to where like I see just like these roles that are there that I have been offered. I was offered this last season of just like, of course, like any American play that I'm in, more often than not, I am going to be called a racial slur when I'm up there. So essentially, I was going to be moving furniture and somebody was going to call me something. But I said, what, and just doing the math, what is this going to afford me later on? When I look at this check every single week, this means that I'm going to have this amount of money to go off to not have to pound the pavement somewhere else here. I can go somewhere and find better roles to do with all this money I've accumulated from playing this, for lack of a better word, horrible role right here. And it sucks because of course there's a lot to unpack there as well of doing what it is that we aren't, but with the price just like involved there and what it is that it will be able to afford you later. I don't know. That's just one of those things to where I wish I was that. Oh no, I'm not going to do that. Whereas I'm still like at that point in my career to where can I still say no to something right now? Am I allowed to say no to something?
And
if I do, ever call me back ever again if I say no.
Yeah, and you're kind of getting into like how, already problematic the artistic process is with theater. That as an actor, you're already in this place of vulnerability of like, there's like, I have to walk this certain line, and that part of this line and this game is, my livelihood and what I do. And, taking into account how you identify racially or how that sits in you racially, your sexual orientation, any of those things, even your political orientation feeds into how you decide once you're given an offer. Are you going to put yourself in that harm's way? And to what you're saying, Jay, too, of like, what's the cost of this? In a monetary sense, what's the emotional cost of going through that? We were talking about a black actor being stabbed by white actors because he's Julius Caesar, and he has to do that every night. And coming from experience of playing certain roles that get into your head, it gets into your head. And there's a point where you do feel that.
Oh yeah.
You definitely.
It just speaks to like the scarcity, right? Like already as actors, we're every artist is moving in a scarcity model because there's just so many people who want to be on stage, and ultimately they can't all be on stage. And then within that, there's scarcity for BIPOC artists. So then most of the time there's like this tiny selection of roles, and then a lot of them are trauma, like are re-triggering racial, like lived experiences of like traumatic instances. I'm like, on every project, I feel like there should be a counselor, you know, because the amount of times I'm sure each of us can name roles we've played where in rehearsal you're called something racially negative over and over, and then you have to perform it. And even though it's acting, we're the ones going through it, having it enacted upon us, our ears and our bodies. You know, like I've stepped away from a lot of that, but I mean, they still exist in large number. I'm like, let's just all be cast in joyous, beautiful, romantic, magical,
That
awesome, colorful pieces, you
that
know, like,
or just pieces where there's no problems. Like Ty and I have always talked about, we want to write a play where everybody's black and the only problem is that the sink is clogged.
right. Where are the
And I wanna
kitchen
be the
sink dramas
plumber.
for Black people?
I want to be the plumber who fixes that sink.
You know, like where's that play? I'm ready to watch it.
We are coming to about our last 10 minutes, and I'll just apologize in advance because we've gotten a lot of great questions in the chat, and as you can tell, this could be a 3-hour chat. I will say there were a handful of questions about Othello, and I'll just say that we kind of made a decision before we even started this that we just weren't going to get into Othello tonight because that kind of a whole other realm of kind of casting situations, and there's enough other stuff to talk about. So they're all great questions, but we just kind of decided ahead of time that we weren't going to go down that rabbit hole tonight. I guess there's kind of two concluding questions I want to ask, but I'm going to ask one more again just about personal choice. There was a question that did come in, you know, kind of looking at like what happens if an ensemble, and it's for a reason, you know, is like all of one race and then one actor of another race. Like if there had been a Black Richard III in an otherwise all white cast. And I know, Newton, you had accepted the role of Caliban this summer at Del Shakes. But I know, knowing who was going to be your Prospero and Miranda, both being Black man and Black woman, played into that. So I wonder if Newton, if you want to talk about that specifically, and if others want to talk about how do you go about, because knowing who else is in that ensemble is a big part of that decision-making process, but you don't always know who that is. And so trying to figure out how you kind of figure out that line.
Yeah, when you're privy and you're fortunate to know enough to know who else is in your cast, it does help you make your decision. To Ty's point about, is this going to be fun? You know, I think that comes into play on top of, is this good work? Is the story I want to tell? You know, is this the career move that I want to make? On top of that is also, will this be fun? And that sometimes will drive it. Speaking about taking the role of Caliban for The Tempest, knowing that the Prospero and the Miranda were going to be Black actors had a very big effect on why I decided to actually do it. I don't know that if it was any other situation, or the more traditional situation, I should say, that I would be as maybe currently excited. What I think that I'm really led me to do it was the opportunity to work with this Black Miranda and this Black Prospero to figure out what is the story that we are going to tell. How are we going to do that, and how does our bodies inform that story? And that prospect kind of really excited me. And it's also the second, full Black family that I've been a part of, Shakespearean family I've been a part of.
Anybody else want to chime in on that about kind of knowing what the rest of your ensemble is, particularly when it comes to the race relations between characters?
So I've been super lucky these past few years that I think because of the work that I've been lucky to get and establish, that I have been able to have a voice sometimes, and like if a cast hasn't been filled out yet, to suggest people to be seen, or to encourage early on, if I see a script first, to suggest it to a company, or to even have a conversation with a director or artistic director about like making sure that it's representative of not only like multicultural experience, but even age and gender. I'm not always successful, but I do feel like I have a certain level of agency nowadays, and I try to activate it always. As you can see, I'm pretty vocal. And so I feel like I've been able to be more comfortable with casts that I'm involved with, because I usually know in advance. And then if I know in advance, I'm like, I might change my mind about something. I don't have a problem nowadays walking away before something happens. And I know that's so terrible, but that's also a part, I think, of like deciding like what are my core values at this moment, and how do I enact them in my work. My art cannot be separated now from my political ideology, my societal beliefs, my core values as a human. So I think that's playing a lot into my decision making as an artist.
I have feelings about this one person versus majority casting thought process, because bluntly, that's usually my way. If it's an all Black cast with a white person, that's not the world. It's just not the world where the Black people have the privilege of being the majority. Or if it were the all white with one Black person, I would feel horrible for that one Black person the entire time. But that's my experience as a Black woman watching that. That's not everybody. And that's, since we're not talking about this one particular play that shall go nameless, like Voldemort, like there are things to be weighed based on how privilege happens in this country, and to swap that is not realistic. Just isn't. And I feel like even with all the other races, from Hispanic to Asian, it's there are many things to be thought about in the midst of that, and all of them include privilege. And if you're not thinking about privilege, or if it's not a part of the play, then something's wrong.
Wow. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to move to our big finish here. And I've got one question that's kind of about you guys paying it forward to the next generation. And then we have a final question that's about you guys getting to be selfish and dream for yourself here. We did have a question that came in that said, what is the most important thing you want rising young BIPOC actors to remember about their identity regarding colorblind and color conscious casting in Shakespeare?
Okay, I'll go first. I want any BIPOC actor to know and love the fact that whatever role you get in Shakespeare becomes whatever race you are. You, by default of who you are. Every time I play a Shakespearean character, that character is inherently Asian because it's me. She walks in my body. She walks with this face. And so that text, that language, those characters are yours. You make them yours, and fight for what you believe in the room. And I know that's so hard, but tear apart the hierarchy. You know, this is a collaborative art, right? And the best Shakespeare is when we all bring the most authentic of ourselves to the table. So that's what I would want to leave the next generation with.
No, I would just to add on to what B is saying here. You know, I think that that is extremely important. You know, like I like just thinking about even like now to where like I'll go into a casting call, and of course like there will be folks of all cultures who are there. And you know, and I think about what is important to me, you know, and what is important to me, I would hope is important to the next generation. That is, you know, of course, whenever you go on that stage, this is your story right here. This is your story. No matter what, no matter where, no matter who you're with, this is your story. There's no getting away from it whatsoever. And if anything, you know, the thing that even with my own fears and my own insecurities, you know, like the things that I need to keep in mind is that I am always proud of this right here. I'm always proud of my story. Because if anything, you know, from age 5, you know, where I come from, it's like they're trying to just wash it off you and say, no, it's like you need to do this, mijo, you need to do that. It's like you need to fit in, you know. Whereas like, no, bro, it's like this is the story, like right here, and embrace it.
I'll go next. That I feel very strongly to ask other BIPOC artists for help, and truly like ask us. We're around. Email us. Show us your monologues. Like ask us about plays that we've read. Ask us about everything and anything. This community is here to help and boost. So I want to tell every single person, like, I might seem intimidating and mean and horrible, but I'm really not. And so you should reach out, because that's the hugest part about, don't shake your head at me. Like that is the hugest part about this though, is that we're all in it together and auditioning together. And I get so excited seeing all of these people at an audition, because I know that the work's gonna be sparkling when I see it, because I know that this community is great. So keep it up.
I guess I'll go next. I would like to, I think, you know, there's not more than what everyone else has said that I can say. And so I'll try to sum it up. It's on the side. You are enough is what I would say. You are enough. And not only are you enough, you're more than enough. And sometimes you're overqualified. And it's okay to feel that and to make space for yourself. And that speaks to, you know, telling your story that you have. You only walk in with that story. That's what is there. That's the story you're telling, whether you speak or not. That is your story. And then also to Ty's point, I say the same thing. Reach out to us. Don't be afraid to seek. I know what it feels like to, you know, to come into a space and you don't know if there's any other people, first of all. And then when you do find the other people, you feel another thing about maybe wanting to come into that space and find fellowship and find community. But I encourage any of the next generations to reach out to me, reach out to any of us, and say, hey, I'm new. We're gonna sweep you up and take you in our arms. I swear, you'll be getting meat patties and apple cider sent to your house. So, you know.
All right, here we go. Big final question now. You guys gonna be selfish now, right? So if there was a Shakespeare role that you've always wanted to play and you haven't gotten to play, what role is it? And what story would it tell having someone like you in that role? I'm gonna let B go first because B already knows. You answered it in our planning meeting.
I mean, I've been secretly rehearsing this role for like 2 years. So I really want to play Lady Macbeth. I said it, but we're not in a theater. Yeah, I feel like, you know, when I've seen versions of Macbeth, I usually see a woman who's tall, physically imposing, you know, and I just feel like, you know, I'm a little under 5 foot tall. I'm soft around the edges. I come with a set of, you know, people expect me to be like cute or sweet, which is totally the subversion of who we expect Lady M to be. And so I feel like there'd be fun in just, I don't know, seeing someone who looks like me come on stage and be a really scary warrior queen, you know, and grab Macbeth by his, you know, and just really like be scary. So that's my dream. One day it'll happen.
Oh, I would love to see that. Love to see that.
All right, who's next?
It's a tough question. Man, Hamlet. I've never done that part. I think of him as sometimes obnoxious, but I also also as kind of as an exploration of my art doing that role. I feel like will be a kind of a great experience. And what would that story be? I think it wouldn't be too far. He's depressed and a lot of things are happening to him, and I think there is a film of depression on all of us right now. So I think it would be very similar to to real life. So yeah.
I'm thinking the end of my journey should take me to King Lear. I mean, really, every single actor worth their salt, whether you're a man or a woman, or not, or non-binary, should take you all the way to King Lear. But seeing that, you know, we are talking about blue sky in it right now. You are talking to a professional Mercutio.
Yeah, I know. Oh, yes.
And exactly what Ty was saying, I always wanted to play Romeo. Like, why can't I play Romeo? Romeo was one that just never happened. It never happened. And the crux about Romeo is that you have to have the mind of a middle-aged, like me, like pressing on middle age. I understand it. Yeah. I understand it now. You have to be everyone in that, because Romeo at the beginning of the play is Hamlet. which morphs into something completely different in the end. And pretty much like the story, I mean, really like the story that it tells, especially if I were to play it, you know, is that number one, hey, you know, like the really edgy, weird, intense dudes need love too.
Yeah.
All right, give us one last dream, Ty.
Can I give you two? Because I strongly believe that that Shakespeare's gendered roles are a problem. I believe this to be so. It's my personal goal to like snatch people away from what they think it needs to be. So number one, if I were getting to play a part without any sense of gender, it would be Macbeth. I would totally want to be your Macbeth to your lady. Oh. That would be hot. Please, let's do this. I have lots of ambition. Let's do this. Like, like I don't understand how that gets to be a part that I don't get to do just because I was born with ovaries. I don't understand it, and so I want the chance. And it's spooky, and I feel like to have a power couple, I mean, that says something also of like having a power couple that is BIPOC trying to rise through the ranks, and the only way that they can do it, unfortunately, is murder. But isn't that kind of how we have to do it sometimes? Anyway, that's a whole other set of issues that, again, color conscious casting would have to figure out for themselves. Other than that, I want to play Cleopatra. I really, really do. I think she's the epitome of strength in the midst of and privilege of like, I own everything and I'm still unhappy and I still want you to come home to me even though I know you're Roman and you have to have a Roman wife. I still think that that's important. And I feel like that play gets a bad rap, and I just feel like there's more to it than the politics of Roman ascension to power. There's also just a huge amount of love and insecurity, and I understand that now, like you were saying, Jay, more so than I did when people assumed I should be auditioning for Cleopatra when I was in my 20s.
All right. Well, B, Ty, Jay, Newton, thank you so much for your graciousness and your honesty tonight and sharing with us. Everyone out there who is watching, we thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your questions. We're sorry we weren't able to get to them all, but we appreciate you engaging with us in that way. We hope you will register and join us on Monday, November 23rd for the next panel in this series, Culturally Specific Shakespeare Productions, which B will be moderating. And then just a final reminder that this is a pay what you decide event. So as soon as we kind of end this here, you're going to send an email from Delaware Shakespeare inviting you to pay what you decide this was worth for you. And we appreciate whatever that is to you. Again, thank you to all of our panelists. Thanks for everyone joining in. Have a lovely night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Pleasure.